said, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe there's some honest thing to do is pull it. They made that decision to pull, so then we watched the building collapse.
They ignored it because they wanted it to happen. Every void starts with a false flag operation.
What I attempted to do in my books was set up a frame of reference that the reader could, hopefully, understand. Obviously, I failed in this. Even now, people are still assuming that ultra-terrestrials are actual entities. What I said in 5 books, carefully spelled out and defined, is that we are the intelligence which controls the phenomenon. John Keel, in a letter to Fortean Times. Hello, and welcome to Historca, Esoterica. I am your friend, Roswell, and I'm joined by...
the tall entity, Moth K Ultra.
How long have you been holding on to that one?
I came up with it while you were reading the opening quote.
It doesn't show. As you may have noticed by the intro and the title of this episode, we are talking about a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, and perhaps Matt's as well.
Yes, indeed.
I love the Mothman. I, like many young boys in the aughts, discovered him while flipping through a book on cryptids and thought, wow, a cool monster. I can't wait to learn more about this. And then Googled him and got scared when I found insane ufology stuff. Did you have the same?
Tale as old as time. Yeah, I had it might have even been the same book. I think we've mentioned this before, but I had a 50 states, 50 cryptids book at my school library. I was like, this is going to rock. And I flipped through it and I was like, well, this sucks because 45 of them were ghosts.
Yeah.
And I was like, this sucks, dude. This is so boring. But then I'm a Virginia boy. Virginia was some lame ghost story. But West Virginia, I was like, oh, now we are talking. So Mothman has been an interest of mine for a long time. Yeah,
and he's sort of had, he's been big in the cultural psyche, since it happened in 1966, but I feel like he's sort of had a resurgence with, girls who get stick and poke tattoos and are mean to me at parties. That kind of person, which, I'm happy. Everybody should enjoy this wonderful tale. So I'm glad he's kind of getting talked about more, especially because when you actually look into the stories, it's a lot weirder than just a Mothman flying around, right?
And more malevolent.
And it's a lot more sinister. And I think people should look into it because I think there is still something we can glean from it. I feel like I will definitely still be taking the skeptical position on this episode. And Matt mentioned he will be too because he did not have time to look into conspiracy theories.
Well, I just won't be taking the crazy position that the listeners may expect of me.
Yeah. I'm excited to find it out. But I figure Matt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's better than Moth K Ultra, isn't it?
Yeah, but I had more time to think about it. So I figure what we'll do is pretty much everyone I think that's listening to this is going to be familiar with it. But I think some of the details might be lost on people because the standard narrative of the Mothman that we hear about is a lot different than what actually happened. So what we're going to do is I'm going to briefly set the stage for everyone. We're going to talk about when, where, and the context of what was going on in 1966 leading up to the events. So Point Pleasant, West Virginia, is a quiet town that lies on the Ohio River, directly on the border between the two states. Like many of the cities found in Appalachia, Point Pleasant is beautiful and rich in history. It is notable for the 1774 Battle of Point Pleasant. The major players of the battle were a confederation of Shawnee and Mingo warriors led by Chief Cornstalk, and the Virginia militiamen led by Colonel Andrew Lewis. After the unceremonious and dishonorable murder of Chief Cornstalk, local legend said that the land was cursed, a belief which would hold until this day. During World War II, an 8,000-acre region just outside of town was devoted to a munitions manufacturing facility. The area employed a few thousand people at its peak. After the end of the Second Great War, the plant was abandoned and its dangerous materials sealed in bunkers hidden under a thin layer of earth. By the 80s, it would come to light that the land around the abandoned plant was severely contaminated by waste. In the meantime, however, the land became known as the TNT area, or more officially, the McClintock Wildlife Management Area, a popular place for the young and adventurous of Point Pleasant to explore. Not far off, past the ominous igloos of the munitions area, was the old power plant, and by that the old National Guard Armory building. Even further, hidden away in the Ohio Valley was an office of the Defense Logistics Agency, a subset of the DoD. The year was 1966. Just as Martin Luther King Jr. was meeting with President Lyndon B. Johnson, the U.S. was still actively involved with the war in Vietnam, and the many-faceted projects that would come to be known as MK Ultra were in full swing. So, that's where we're at, temporally and spatially.
Yeah, that about covers it. There was much to consider.
There is much to consider. I think there's a lot we can raise our eyebrows at just from what was happening around Point Pleasant, West Virginia at this time,
Mm-hmm.
what was happening in the United States and the world at large, and just, the history of that great, beautiful state of West Virginia. So with that being said, I think we should hop into the first encounters, and basically the things leading up to the first encounter with the Mothman. So we're going to start at November 12th, 1966 in Clendenin, West Virginia, 85 miles from Point Pleasant. On this day, 5 men digging a grave at a cemetery observed what appeared to be a flying man with wings soaring across the sky. The following night in Salem, West Virginia, 90 miles from Point Pleasant, Merle Partridge and his family would hear a loud noise outside of their house as they were watching TV. At this moment, the TV began making a high-pitched whine before exploding. At the same time, Merle heard his large German shepherd, Bandit, barking outside. Grabbing his gun, Merle exited his home just in time to see Bandit running off into the dark. He called for the dog, which was supposedly very well trained, but Bandit did not listen and continued off into the forest. As he looked over his property, Merle saw what appeared to be red flashing lights rotating in the air. Partridge, who had spent some time in the Air Force, maintains that it was not an aircraft, but some strange occurrence or trick of the light. After a moment, the lights vanished. Sadly, Bandit did not return, and that was the last time Merle and his family would ever see their dog. They searched the area for him, for days afterwards, but they found no clues or signs of struggle or disturbances on the property. The day after the occurrence, Merle and his family were outside in the afternoon when they saw the entire sky go dark. The sun had been blotted out by a large shape that appeared overhead. Merle said, quote, "I can't even describe it. It was humongous. You didn't see anything else but that. It was some kind of mechanical thing. A dull gray finish on it. It had a lot of portholes in it. A lot of rivets I could see." End quote. 2 days later, on November 15th, 2 couples spotted something frightening and strange in the old TNT area just outside of town. According to the Point Pleasant Register issue that would come out the following day, the couples, Roger and Linda Scarberry and Steve and Mary Millette, were driving between 11:30 p.m. and midnight when they spotted a gray figure standing in the road near the old power plant. They described the thing as being 6 or 7 feet tall, having a wingspan of 10 feet, and red eyes about 2.5 inches in diameter and 6 inches apart. They described it as a man with wings, but that the head was not an outstanding characteristic. Linda Scarberry said, quote, "Maybe what you would visualize was an angel," end quote.
I just want to say, that is not at all what I am visualizing when I hear any descriptions of Mothman.
Me either.
This beautiful angelic being.
Yes, God has visited us today.
Yeah.
Like with all the sightings, though, the burning red eyes left the biggest impression on witnesses.
Mhm.
Steve Millette, was quoted as saying, quote, "This doesn't have an explanation to it. It was an animal, but nothing like I've seen before," end quote. Perturbed by the sight, the group turned to leave. This thing followed them, hovering over their car, apparently gliding, until they reached the National Guard Armory on Route 62, where it seemed to lose interest. It should be noted that at this point, the car was going nearly 100 miles per hour as they were being chased by the creature. Also, as they had been flying down Route 62, they noticed a dead dog on the side of the road. The couples rushed to the police station where they reported the sighting to Deputy Millard Halstead. Halstead reported that the couples were very afraid and insisted that they had not been drinking. The police separated the 4 witnesses into separate rooms to write individual police reports, all of which corresponded with each other. At the time, police took the sighting seriously and did not feel like it was a prank. This is shown by the fact that the deputies followed the couple back to the area where they surveyed the scene. The dead dog was no longer present, nor was the strange creature, but Deputy Halstead said that he saw dust kicked up in the vicinity of a coal field, as if birds had left it recently. As the police and the couples approached the old TNT area, the police radios picked up strange interference, whining and squealing, which quickly passed. So that is with some extra information from the week leading up to it, that is the first sighting of the Mothman. And I think the most credible, in my opinion. What do you think?
Definitely
about that?
the one that everyone talks about, at least.
Yes, for sure. It is scary. I tend to personally, and we'll get into this when we talk about theories, but I tend to believe for the couples, because this is one of those things where it's like, they don't seem like the type of people that would be predisposed to prank. They don't seem like they'd get anything out of that. The police took them seriously at the time. And yeah, so I tend to believe this. I don't know what they saw, but there's something strange happened.
Yeah, and this might actually, I might be remembering this from Mothman Prophecies, which is a somewhat dubious source on these events. But I believe I remember hearing from some source that the officer himself, like, later vouched for the kids. It was like they weren't like the sort of people to prank police officers, which.
Yeah, that's vouched for in multiple places, including a couple of the documentaries I watched in preparation for this, and I believe a couple of the news reports. Yeah.
And also, I don't know, like I similarly, I agree that I'm pretty sure these kids saw something, whatever it was. I don't think that they were making it up, because also, if it's a prank or you're making it up for attention, you probably wouldn't start with, there was a giant red-eyed being that sailed silently through the night,
right,
directly above our car. He'd probably go for something, I don't know, that people have heard of before.
Sure, yeah. You're not making your own cosmology here for
exactly.
for your prank. Yeah. It's not like the scary clown sightings in 2018 or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, where it's like generic spooky clown. This was something that, I mean, while it has similarities to other spooky things in history, like, this is something new and unique, and I think that's noticeable by the impression it's left on our cultural psyche. But yeah, so that sort of wraps up that, and over the following weeks, sightings of this creature became routine in Point Pleasant. For example, 9 days after the first Mothman sighting, 2 adults and 2 children spotted the creature near the old TNT area. Sightings skyrocketed, soon totaling in the hundreds. Most noticeably, they noticeably took place along the north and south power plants, the abandoned TNT area, and along the Ohio River. So kind of the same 3 spots are the most notable area of Mothman activity. And this sort of uncorked the bottle for a Pandora's box of strange occurrences which would explode at this time over the next 13 months in Point Pleasant. Why don't we get into that? What were some of the creepy things that happened in Point Pleasant, Matt, that you can think of?
Well, as we mentioned, there is honestly, I think the biggest one to talk about is the TNT area, just hanging out right outside of town.
Yeah.
Which isn't great, right? Having this giant military bomb factory that poisons the ground and is declared a a protected area. I don't know if you were shooting for something a little different. Were we talking about the creepy things happening post Mothman or prior? I must have
Yeah, I
misheard.
think we could talk about post Mothman because the definitely that is a spook. Like there are a lot of spooky facets. I mean, like with a lot of the American South, a lot of the towns just have very spooky histories. This one especially with like the horrible war of Native Indigenous people versus the Virginia militia and like the kind of terrible thing that happened to Chief Cornstalk. And so like you've kind of got that like bloody history, and then you've got World War II, you've got something literally poisoning the earth that people are standing on. It's definitely a spooky place.
Yeah, and even more interestingly, right, Mothman as metaphor, sort of, right, is that
right.
Mothman showed up only, like, it was very briefly after they found out that it was poisonous, and we're like, oh, we probably shouldn't
Actually,
let people...
no,
Oh,
that's
was
not
that beforehand?
True. No, they didn't find out it was poisonous until the 80s.
Oh, shoot, hang on. I must have my timeline all cleared up. Sorry, everybody.
According to NPR.org.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I believe NPR.
Yeah, I trust the
sorry, everybody. It's finals
folks,
week for me, so Matt's a little scrambled.
No worries, dude.
But, yeah, I mean, it is nevertheless, like, this thing designed specifically to kill people that also happens to be poisoning the very earth around it, that also has this mysterious evil being rise up from it unexpectedly and then disappear suddenly. It feels very poignant on that level, sort of like a Winchester Mansion kind of thing. But yeah,
definitely. Well, something that was interesting about one of the documentaries, like a lot of the historians in Point Pleasant and West Virginia who were talking about the area, they do talk about how, again, going back to Chief Cornstalk, who supposedly cursed the land as he died, which obviously historically didn't happen, because when you die, you don't get enough time to, go, I curse this as you're being shot in the face.
Yeah, regrettably, it's not like a D&D kind of thing.
No, you don't get your last words before you fail your final death saving throw. So like that is kind of what local legend had held, and anytime something horrible would happen, as horrible things often do in the American South leading up to the early 20th century, people would say, oh, that's that curse again. That's something that's kind of ingrained in the culture. And then after 1960s, the curse morphs into the Mothman. So is it, subconsciously a modern take on the curse of Chief Cornstalk, a postmodern take? I think in some ways, yeah. But that being said, concrete things did happen around these occurrences, like the one we just discussed. And again, in 13 months following, a lot of crazy things. I think we can just jump into the big one first.
Yeah, before you do that, though, I would like to know, just in case, I like to think our listeners wouldn't be annoying about this, but I would like to note, yes, everybody, we know that West Virginia is not always considered the American South. I think Roswell means Appalachia there.
Oh, sorry, yeah. No, that's on me.
No, that's okay. This is just me. Hope, listeners, if you're the sort of person to comment, West Virginia isn't the South, reconsider your life. But also,
no, thank you for defending me from pedantic people.
Yeah, you know me, I love fact checking on this show.
I'm a West Coast boy, so
Coastal Elite Roswell, you guys heard it here first.
Well, no. So what was I saying?
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to derail you there. We're talking,
Strange Times in Point Pleasant, the big one. And this was actually coined by the book we've mentioned several times now, the Mothman Prophecies. The occurrence of men in black. Now, this has appeared in like conspiracy literature and like UFO stuff before then. But John Keel, in his book about this, termed the coin men in black because it was especially noticeable here. This might be the biggest occurrence of like the men in black phenomena happening. And I think it's the first time it happened and was maybe noted on a national level, and like then began to flood into the public psyche. But like, for those who don't know, the men in black are not, fun Will Smith shooting aliens. They're generally described as strange men, obviously in black, with generally a foreign-looking appearance, usually kind of racistly described by John Keel, which I think we'll get into when we get to the theories, because I do have some stuff on that. But going around acting eccentric, and generally the tone is like, oh, they're not from this earth, they don't understand what pens are.
Yeah.
But the idea is that they're these sinister, bizarre people who don't exactly identify who they are and where they're from. And a lot of the people who had seen Mothman or who had turned in seeing sights of UFOs, which began happening after the Mothman appeared, would be visited by these guys and kind of shaken down, and in some cases sort of vaguely threatened. One, I think the best example I can think of is Mary Heyer, who was a journalist for the Ashlands Messenger, who was kind of the first person to lead the charge on reporting all of the strange sightings post the first Mothman incident. And I tend to trust Mary and her journalistic integrity, but as she was beginning to document Mothman, UFOs, and these men in black, in January of 1967, her and her coworker met one of these guys while working late in their office at the county courthouse. So this isn't just like random crackpots. This is, you have journalists and like other members of the community reporting this as well.
Yeah, and I just looked up the Men in Black, so I was just curious to see like what the first like MIB specific thing is. It was in 1947, following the Maury Island incident.
Yeah,
which is another sort of weird one. And I do think it's interesting that it's very interesting that they are somewhat racistly described by John Keel, a guy who's just full of weird takes. But generally, though, outside of him, it generally follows more like what you were describing, where it is just sort of a vaguely threatening, but never really overt from what I've seen. It's more
uncanny.
subtle.
Yeah, and like the threats are more like, oh, you probably shouldn't be talking about Mothman so much. Like, again, it's like indirect threats. It's not a direct like, don't talk. It's
and not even like the mafia style indirect direct threat. You know, it's like, oof, you got a nice place. It'd be a shame if you kept talking about aliens and someone killed you. Like, it is very much like I wouldn't talk about that if I were you, but reach their own. Like, and they have like the weird behavior, like, because that's the weird thing about Men in Black, is that, like you said, like they have the very strange cadence and just way of approaching the world. So I love that in the UFO community, you have people who are like, they're government agents, and then the other people are, they're aliens sent to observe us. It's like, well, it's got to be one or the other, right?
It's got to be one or the other. Yeah,
they're very weird.
Here's the thing too, because it's like, the Men in Black in the Point Pleasant case, they start appearing after. I believe they start appearing after it starts to get national attention. Yeah,
like it blows up and then they show up.
So a case could be made that this is also, the type of people who were maybe interested in ufology in the 1950s might have been a little strange. And so I'm not saying this, applies to all of them, but it could be said that maybe some of the pranksters, some of the hoaxsters, and some of the interested parties that were just, kind of odd, lone fellows, could have been mistaken by, the secluded members of Point Pleasant as these Men in Black, right? Like, I don't know if there's a clear-cut answer with who all of these people are.
Yeah, there's definitely something to that, right? Like, I think John Keel actually speculated about that, where it's like maybe the Men in Black were just UFO fans with autism, which unsurprisingly got him some angry letters. But
well, I mean, even John Keel, as he was reporting it, he's like this 6 foot tall guy with a beard. Like, I think that's the first chapter of the book. It's like,
it's one of the ones I was able to read.
Beelzebub comes to Point Pleasant or something like that, where it's like he's like this man in a slick suit with a pointed black beard, and he's banging on people's doors, and people are like, "Who is this character?"
It must be the devil,
right? And it's John. It's John Keel is the joke, but like I'm sure they probably didn't actually think he was the devil. But like if you're a outsider in like that type of community, especially in the 60s, it's going to be noticed. And I don't know. I think.
As will your ethnic background.
Right. Yeah. Well, and another thing too is like everybody was paranoid and on edge. We still haven't talked about some of the other strange things that were going on, but something weird was happening. I don't think you can deny that in Point Pleasant.
Yeah.
And it had everyone on edge, which is why I think there's something to some of these strange things.
Yeah,
And
oh no, keep going, please.
I was just gonna say, I think sometimes it might be clouded by your John Keels running around.
Yeah, it's weird because this is like Point Pleasant at this point is. There's a couple places in history, where like you look and it's just like this was just a weird time, right?
Yes.
Just for some reason, for like a year or two,
Vibes were off.
something strange, like all this weird, like this noumenal stuff just sort of like bubbles up, and you're like, what's going on? Why is all this happening in Point Pleasant or whatever? And I think, yeah, some of that probably is just that general weirdness getting filtered, or rather,
Absolutely.
these people getting filtered through that general weirdness.
Yeah.
And like almost everything about the Mothman case, as we'll get into later, yeah, like you said, there's no one size fits all solution to these guys,
No.
but I think it is sort of a mix of everything.
Yeah, and I don't think we explicitly talked about like how people, well, maybe we did, but people will say like, oh, it's the government, or oh, it's aliens observing us. Like very much like either a government shakedown, cover up, or aliens, if you're going to be a little more crazy about it, aliens being spooky and coming and messing with us, or if you want to be even crazier, demons and goblins,
Yeah.
or whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I do think, I will say, admittedly, I think that the sort of the prankster angle of this, the longer it goes on, the more believable it gets for me, because, the more time people have to plan something, it's very easy to dress up in a black suit and act weird. So we also can't rule that out. I don't think that it was everybody doing this. But
no, I think there definitely were. I mean, not even like there's factually some hoaxsters that were pointed out, which I think is sort of the problem, because people see that and then they immediately want to write it off and say the whole thing is a wash. Which unfortunately it's not. And we'll get into my theories on that later.
but for sure.
There's definitely a level of crap coding going on here to keep our clean.
That's right. We're avoiding our explicit label on Spotify.
Hey, I'm a follower of Christ. I don't say cussies. You remember when he said that in the Bible? Anyway, enough of that. But so I think just to kind of bullet point some of the other strange things that were happening, I mentioned UFOs, like mysterious crafts were seen by a not small amount of people. Phone lines being down, lots of phone troubles and interference. This one really made my eye open, which was people hearing strange electronic interferences and voices above their heads as they were walking around, which sounded a little Operation Wandering Soul to me, which maybe we'll get back to. Several neighbors in one instance saw a series of unexplainable red lights, again with the red lights, followed by a group of small men boarding some sort of craft. This was corroborated by, I believe, 4 different households, which, if it's a prank, it's a weird one, and it doesn't make sense for 4 households of adults to like do that. I mean, maybe, but it's strange. And then, of course, we have, I think, one of the biggest one, aside from the Mothman himself, which was Indrid Cold, which is another fun character, who supposedly spoke to several of the residents with telepathy. And one of the guys, the guy who initially saw it, I believe it kind of drove him into a little bit of a depression, and it had him checking himself into psych wards and being evaluated, because the attention on like his claims about Indrid Cold were being kind of mocked and ridiculed the nation over. So he was dealing with that. And I remember one specific instance of like, because he felt like he was getting these telepathic, signals beamed into his head, he went to a psychiatrist. They gave him a clean bill of health. And then a week later, that psychiatrist said that the same thing happened, which is weird. Yeah. It's very strange. Weird. Yeah. And I mean, again, we'll get back to this when we get into the theories section of our discussion. But like, if you're the type of person that believes the government maybe send you messages auditorily or electronically, in a targeted fashion with some sort of, technology to drive you crazy, I mean, that could be one thing. Or I don't know. It's just like, it's very strange that so many people were having such a variety of weird things, because often one of the, explanations that like writes this away is like mass hysteria. And it's like, usually with mass hysteria, it's people seeing the same things over and over. You're getting copycats and stuff, right? Like with Spring Heel Jack and other things like that. Like you're getting the Mad Gasser of Mattoon or whatever it was. Like people are worried about this one thing that for whatever reason gets a community up in arms. But it's not just the Mothman. It's UFOs, it's strange lights, it's electrical interference, it's men in black, it's injured cold, and it's little men boarding crafts. So very strange.
There's just everything weird is happening all at once.
Yes. Yeah.
Also, just as a side note, I looked up Injured Cold because there's a spooky picture I had found of him earlier today that I wanted to look at again. And I found my way onto the cryptids.fandom.com page and just wanted to read the first sentence, which is to say, Injured Cold, commonly known as the Smiling Man, is an allegedly humanoid entity. Which is just
allegedly humanoid.
Allegedly humanoid. Some have said he's humanoid.
That's the funniest thing to allege, that someone may or may not be humanoid. Well, that's the thing is like he was described as he kind of falls into the man in black category because he's described as a strange man in black with a smile, but I think he's one of the few that like gave a name that stood out. Like
he's like the Agent Smith of the Men in Black. Like, he's the one people remember.
He's the likable one, and I think he was also memorable for getting out of a large like cylinder on the state highway that was some sort of craft, which apparently was corroborated by a bunch of witnesses saw the man I was talking about earlier who supposedly got telepathic messages from him. A bunch of people saw him talking to this guy who got out of a strange vehicle on the highway. So it's like, that's weird too. Like if this is a big gag, there's so many people in on it at this point, and it's so confusing and convoluted. I don't know. To me, there's something going on. I'm not saying it's paranormal, which we'll talk about again in our conclusion, because I don't think it is. But something weird is happening to the people in Point Pleasant, and I don't think you can just write this off as everybody was a bit silly. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And again, we'll talk about it when we get to the explanations, right? But it's the same as like, I just re-listened to the Subliminal Jihad episode on it, and also their episode on the Hopkinsville Goblins.
Oh, that's another good one.
And it's weird because like both of those have the same energy about them, where it's like, oh, these dumb hicks, they just got startled by an owl or whatever.
They must have been drunk, and it's like,
yeah, it's just like, oh, these foolish people. Something like that would never happen in my town. Anyway, off to post about fentanyl. Yeah, exactly. Like,
yes, it's killing our cops when they look at it.
Yes.
It is funny that fentanyl is like the sword from Kung Fu Panda that cuts you if you look at it. Sorry, that's a digression. But yeah, no, totally. There definitely is, especially and they even talked about this in the documentary, that like people around town were worried about often bringing these reports forward because they were worried that like when it goes national, they're going to be made fun of by, quote unquote coastal elites, which of course they were, because it's so easy for, big city, secular people to look at somewhere like rural Appalachia and be like, these dumb hicks. When if you've ever lived somewhere rural, like you and I both have, and the hicks, there's plenty of smart people there. Those types of areas may tend towards more superstition in some cases, but I don't know. I think it's just classist to say that they're stupid, personally.
Yeah, because even then I'd argue that it's more just that it's a slightly more old-fashioned kind of superstition.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's not salt lamps and your zodiac sign.
Yeah.
No offense.
No offense. Look, we've said enough things on here. I don't think we get to make fun of people who believe in the zodiac very much, but we get to a little bit.
Just a little bit. No, we're just having fun here. We're just having fun.
But it's just very strange, and that's also something where, I mean, I've been open before about the fact that I'm not a huge UFO guy. But
yeah, same.
It's very similar with, while there are UFOs in this one, with the things that are just UFOs, oftentimes you will have people who are afraid to come out because you get made fun of. It has ruined several people's lives because they refused to back down and just got made fun of. And I don't know. You shouldn't. It's weird to me that most people's first assumption is that it was like being made up or that it was a misunderstanding, and not that, I don't know, it's a misremembering of something real. If you want to go the skeptical route.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it just, I don't know, it speaks to the maybe manufactured strain between two different layers of our culture, which is the more rural salt of the earth and the more secular, kind of city dwelling. that I don't know. It's these people tend to get pitted against each other politically in the media, so it maybe makes sense that this kind of spills over into these cases.
Yeah.
Yeah, but whatever. We're not here to talk about fake news, as some might say.
We're going to talk about real news, like
real
the
news.
Mothman.
The Mothman. Yeah. But yeah, so this is like, there's just a lot of weird things going on. And I'm sure that there's rational explanations for all of it. I genuinely believe that, but I just don't think you can write it off as hysteria or craziness or all hoaxes. There's just too much going on. And unfortunately, after 13 months of strangeness and publicity and just general weirdness, this all ended in sort of a big, very big tragedy, which was the Silver Bridge collapse. So on December 15th, 1967, right after President Lyndon Johnson switched on the yearly Christmas lights at the White House, the television broadcast was interrupted by a breaking news bulletin that the aging Silver Bridge, which connected Point Pleasant, West Virginia to Ohio, had collapsed during rush hour of all times, which this sent 46 drivers and pedestrians, including some Mothman witnesses, to their deaths, sadly. I think it's interesting to note that following the disaster, there was a sharp drop in Mothman sightings and other anomalous activity. It almost stopped overnight, which is, I think, very interesting, and we'll touch on that later. But investigation of the wreckage of the bridge pointed to the cause of collapse being the failure of a single eye-bar in the suspension chain, which had a small defect in it, because the bridge itself was carrying much heavier loads than it had been designed for over the years, and it had been poorly maintained. So it just, like a lot of things that aren't maintained, it just collapsed and unfortunately claimed nearly 50 lives. But, you know, when we talk about Mothman Prophecies, this is kind of the thing that signals the end of this, you know, legend. And the popular notion, again, popularized by John Keel, is that maybe the Mothman was here to warn us about incoming danger.
Yeah. Which, I don't know.
I also don't buy it. I do think the Silver Bridge collapsing was unconnected to the anomalous events, outside of it being the reason that they stopped.
And that's something that everybody has to sort of acknowledge, and I think that's part of why it's always talked about in the same breath. Yeah. Because while the Mothman connections are a little dubious,
right?
We saw what happened, right? Do we want to talk about why we think they stopped right afterwards now, or do we want to hold off for a second?
Yeah, let's go ahead and just jump into it while we're here.
Okay, cool. So I'll let you start while I finish gathering my thoughts and my notes.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's many different ways you can look at it. I think the most logical is that if the city, I shouldn't say if, we know the city was gripped by a certain amount of hysteria. I don't think everything that was happening could be chalked up to hysteria, but there was a certain level of fear and paranoia at this point. And something tragic like that happening is going to shake everybody up and change, you know, the vibe of the place. And if also, like, let's say a bunch of hoaxes and stuff were happening, you're probably going to be less inclined to play a prank after some really horrific event strikes the city that affects pretty much everyone who lives there.
Yeah, and like going back to the you know, like the creepy clown example we talked about, which I really think is pretty much the most recent example of something weird like this that I can think of, at least.
Yeah.
If, like, for instance, one of those clowns had like killed a family in their homes, something tells me that all the rest of them would have stopped doing that, in the very least, to not bring any heat to themselves.
Right.
And yeah, it's interesting because I've gone back and forth on the mass hysteria thing myself, because I could also see sort of a different timeline, if you would, where this like cranked things up even higher. You know, like it just sort of added to the general weird vibe, and the hysteria sort of continued to spiral. And in that case, I wouldn't be surprised if there were more Mothman things. It was sort of like a manifestation of that nervousness and paranoia.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's very interesting either way to look at it, and how sharp the drop off is immediately afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's the thing is, like, that also could be due to maybe lack of reporting on it because there's a
Mhm.
bigger fish to fry at this point, or maybe people just aren't coming forward. Um, there's a lot of different angles you can look at it from, but yeah, I don't know. I tend to fall in line with that more skeptical. Like
Yeah.
this is what was going to happen as a bigger event hit the town.
Yeah, and as we've alluded to before, a lot of the so-called prophecies that the Mothman is related to are like this. They're very tenuous in terms of their
Yeah.
actual concrete connection.
Yeah, definitely. Do you want to jump into theories?
Sure, yeah, let's jump into theories.
Okay.
The theories of Mothman.
The theories of Mothman. Okay, I want to start with perhaps the most, I guess, skeptical and materialist, which was that Mothman was a bird. So
I hate this theory so much.
I do too. But to give everybody a little bit of background, 2 weeks after the first sightings, Dr. Robert L. Smith, associate professor of wildlife biology at WVU, said that the sightings fit the description of a sandhill crane. A sandhill crane is a large bird that can have up to a 7-foot wingspan and has red spots on its head, which, according to the doctor, could be mistaken for eyes. And I think that would be an acceptable answer if the creature that the couples had described hadn't been so monstrous and essentially been a man-shaped beast that 4 witnesses if we're going just off the initial record, the 4 witnesses saw and corroborated. Not one of those people went, I think it's a bird, right?
Yeah.
Also, a 7-foot versus a 10-foot wingspan is a big difference.
Yeah, and I could see someone getting that wrong in the night, but the
But
biggest
4
thing for
people?
me is 4 people. Yeah, the biggest thing to me, of course, is the red spots, as opposed to the shining, reflective red eyes. Which
yeah, it feels a bit convenient because, red spots on the like the feathery exterior of the head of a bird are not going to be fluorescent in the night. Also, this doesn't. The bird keeping up with a speeding car or being able to lift a dead dog strains credulity. I mean, that doesn't make logical sense.
Yeah,
and
it's
it doesn't account for the strange radio interference, lights, and other phenomenon that were happening. So,
yeah, it's too neat, I think, is what it is. It's convinced that it's much neater than it is. Actually, is what the problem, right? Where you just go,
right.
These foolish people. It was a bird.
Yeah, it was a bird. And again, anybody who lives in a forested area like you or I have, because I lived very near to West Virginia at one point. You live in a Virginia, which I imagine is similar. I don't actually know. But if you've ever been out at night and seen a weird animal, you could know the difference between a bird and a giant Mothman.
Yeah, exactly. It's very strange because I've seen herons at night. Just by nature of where I live and the fact that I had a bird watching class. So I had to go out at night by rivers and watch herons specifically.
Oh.
And never once did they look at me with their luminous glowing eyes and paralyze me with fear or keep track with my car. And also, they're not humanoid shaped. They're big. You look at them, but you go, you look at them and you go, that's a big bird.
Yeah, exactly.
You go, this is a man.
Yeah, and I think, too, especially something that was telling was one of the witnesses said, it was definitely an animal. I just don't know what it was in the first report. He didn't think it was some monster. The woman described it like it was an angel, but they all thought it was just some animal they hadn't seen before. And also, if you see a big bird at night, you don't go to the police, and you also don't have trauma and nightmares and anxiety for years to come, as several of the witnesses did.
Yeah. Or fall ill immediately after seeing it, for the next few days, which you could account for anxiety. I mean, chalk that up to anxiety. But
sure,
once again, I know people who have phobias of birds and don't have that happen after they see birds.
Exactly.
It's just
So as much as I would like to buy this theory, because it would, it also just seems too how silly,
Yeah, exactly.
All right, we can all go home. So
it's the other equivalent one for the bird is that it was a barn owl, and a little later we're going to talk about another thing that was chalked up to being a barn owl that I find equally unconvincing, because owls, that's even less believable, right? If you've seen an owl before, they're big birds.
Yeah,
2 feet tall, which is big for a bird.
That's big for a bird, but It's 2 feet tall.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
also can't fly 100 miles an hour.
Exactly. And also, we know what owls look like.
Yeah. They're not, even in very dark nights, an owl is easy to see when it's flying because you go,
Yeah.
look at that owl-shaped thing moving silently. Because
Well,
owls
do
are
you wanna-
spooky, I will say that. They don't make noise when they fly, and that's
No, no.
very cool to read about and a little creepy when you watch it happen.
Yeah. They're beautiful creatures.
Beautiful
Actually,
creatures.
since we're on the topic of owls, do you want to just jump into that?
Sure, yeah, let's jump into that.
Because again, this is another thing that people have said, like, if not a sandhill crane, it was a large owl that people were seeing. And maybe in some of the cases, like once the jar had been let off the lid had been let off the jar about Mothman, maybe some people who were looking to see Mothman, looking at jumping at shadows might have had these experiences. But for the first few where this was not a thing yet, I don't think it fits.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something I should have made that clearer to begin with. But yeah, I do think as the story sort of spiraled on and the weirdness just kept getting cranked up, sort of going back to, our thoughts on magic, right? Whether it's literally real or not, if you're going around looking for things, it'll be much easier to find them.
Absolutely.
And if you're, I don't know, like some jumpy guy from like the Midwest who's in this strange Appalachian town looking for something scary flying around at night, I mean, you're in Appalachia. You're going to find something spooky flying around.
Well, and we actually talked about that on our Winchester Mystery House episode, like on the kind of the methodology of ghost hunters and ufologists is to go out and look for these things, not to examine existing phenomena, right? So, and I think that definitely did happen at a certain point into the Mothman, craze.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But yeah, so tell us about this other strange Virginia beast.
Right, yeah. So I think it was a little over a decade prior, also in West Virginia, we have the Flatwoods Monster. So yeah, this is 1952 is when this occurred. And it is a weird being. Whenever you look at the pictures of it, this thing always scared me more than the Mothman, personally. In part because there's a little less on it. It didn't blow up quite as much. There weren't as many sightings.
What was it called?
The Flatwoods Monster.
Flatwoods. Oh,
so
interesting.
The big things about it are it has these small clawed hands. It's about it's a scary picture. But
so creepy.
The one in like the first book I read it on was also like black and white. So to emphasize the fact that the eyes were glowing, they had put these giant like lines coming out of it, like if you have an astigmatism and look at a street light at night. So it was just very spooky all around. But yeah, so it's this like 7 foot tall, glowing eyed being. Its head is shaped like an ace of spades is the wording. And it hovered towards this group of people who saw it. And they ran away, of course. And this is the other instance where you find an owl is pinned on this thing, which once again, just size. I do not believe this. The Wikipedia, which at this point, we should just have a section dedicated to me getting mad at the Wikipedia article. I don't even know. I only come in here to get mad at them now. I never go to these things for actual research at this point. But
yeah, no, it is amazing how much they tend to leave out. I'll just say that much.
Yeah, no, it's, like the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? I have that before Wikipedia where it's like, if you know very little, then you're very confident in yourself. If you know very little, you're confident in the Wikipedia. If you know just a bit, you're like, okay, we probably shouldn't trust, we should trust Wikipedia. And then if you know a lot, you're like, oh no, we shouldn't trust Wikipedia.
Oh no, were our teachers right, Matt?
Yeah, I know. Oh, shoot.
I hate to say it.
But anyway, on it, they have a picture of a barn owl, and it says, a barn owl, seen with, quote, claw-like hands, and a face, quote, shaped like the ace of spades. Which, it isn't. Barn owls, they have heart-shaped faces. That's the shape that you would say.
Famously.
Yeah, exactly. You look at it and you would go, oh, it has a heart-shaped face, which is what makes barn owls cute and cool, by the way.
Right.
Is they have the
Except,
cute little hearts.
Of course, as we all know, the club-faced owl.
Yeah, of course.
Keeping with our deck of card themes owl. Yeah, no, but it does not at all. Like anybody who's listening and able at the moment to Google something, Google the Flatwoods Monster. I don't. No matter how quickly you were looking at something, I don't think you could mistake that for an owl.
Yeah, so here, hang on, let me, while we're on the Wikipedia page, let me just write this. Let's see. Describe the figures approximately 10 feet tall with a round, blood-red face, a large pointed hood-like shape around the face, eye-like shapes which emitted a greenish-orange light, and a dark black or green body. He described the figures having small claw-like hands, clothing-like folds, and a head that resembled the ace of spades. And the figure, according to the story, made a hissing sound and began to glide towards the group, at which point they ran away. And just with the way that owls work, if an owl is diving towards you, it's going to get very close to you very quickly.
Right.
And I just don't understand what state of fear could lead someone to see an owl from far away and watch it come towards them and think, well, this creature was 10 feet tall and then got closer to me. I really don't buy it.
No.
And then the other thing that we're going to talk about in 1 second, which is to say the explanations for the red lights emanating from these beings' eyes. The really big one, the one that bothers me a lot, is the red eye effect thing. Like, oh yeah, it was just red eye shine. I looked it up to make sure. That's just in cameras. That people don't see the red eye effect.
No, I mean
you can't.
I guess there's
like
a possibility, but it has to be from such a specific angle because the idea is that it's shining off of the back of your eye cavity, and like the blood, is reflecting back. But it happens because the cameras flash so quick, and it happens at certain specific angles. And in real life, you'd have to catch the light of a creature's eye at certain specific angles, and
then its eyes would have to not dilate.
Right, exactly. And 4 people seeing, again, I hate to bring it back to this, but 4 people driving along seeing the eyes glow red, and that never changed. Like, then the eyes never stopped glowing red.
And there's never a point where like it turned its head and then they stopped and then they returned again, right? And like, I don't know, like anybody who has a cat, or I think dogs have it too, right? The little eye shine, right? A, it's not red. But B, it also doesn't happen very long. Like your cat looks at you and you're like, ugh, and then its eyes stop glowing.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, no, the red eye explanation does not fit for me.
And then an even less satisfying one was provided for the Flatwoods Monster. Do you want to hear that?
I do.
Let's see, where is it? Yeah. So there was, before the Flatwoods Monster showed up, there was like a bright flash in the sky, which many people say was a meteor. But people think that the pulsating red light emanating from its eyes was actually an aircraft navigation or hazard beacon, and that the creature closely resembled an owl, is the description there. It also, so people were like, the reason that its eyes were glowing red, you know how like planes, they're red lights in the sky? I guess it just illuminated the owl perfectly and terrifyingly, causing it to appear 10 feet tall and to have glowing eyes.
You know how that happens. That's a thing that's always happening.
And once again, right? Like it's this answer that's simultaneously so like it makes so many jumps, but it's also so condescending, right? Where it's like, oh yeah, you just didn't realize that the entire place was being lit up red. You thought it was just its eyes.
Yeah, you idiot. Yeah, it's always they always have that like air of like, come on, silly, you didn't see a monster.
Yeah,
it's the 20th century.
Yeah, and again, neither of us, I think, is a true like Mothman Flatwoods Monster believer. Like I do think that there's unlike, when I get mad about like, I don't know, spy conspiracy theories and people like debunking those, like it's because I believe them. But with these, it's like, no, I just think there's just no way. Like,
right. The explanations just don't fit. And I think that is a problem we've gotten very comfortable in our culture with, is accepting those type of condescending, but like just not at all compelling explanations for, extraordinary events. Like I don't believe anything paranormal happened with Mothman, but it was certainly something strange that happened. And I think just saying, like it was an owl that to me is almost as dumb as saying it was an alien. No offense to the ufologists in the audience tonight, but I just don't think it fits with the evidence.
Yeah, frankly, I think it's a little bit less believable than saying that you think it was an alien. Because at least if you think it was an alien, it's like you have the testimony of groups of frightened and traumatized people.
That is true. I'll give you that.
Whereas with this, like the people who say it was an owl are going off of the exact same witness testimony. They're just choosing to, funnily enough, they're choosing to ignore the parts that like don't jive with their specific interpretation of events.
Yeah,
and then
crazy
like
how that goes.
forming a narrative around it. I don't know. It's and I don't know. I'm going a little harder up against the owl theory than I probably should be, but it deeply annoys me. So I wanted to get that out of the way.
I think the reason it annoys us because it's so condescending, and I think it's rude to the people who I would call them not just witnesses but victims of something very traumatizing. And I think it's just it feels very like a very unjust way to kind of brush people off. But that being said, why don't we get into another common explanation, which is that it was aliens. That either the Mothman was an extraterrestrial or the Men in Black were extraterrestrials, and these UFOs that we're seeing were extraterrestrial.
Yeah, the strange beings boarding mysterious silvery tubes.
Exactly. So John Keel is kind of one of the biggest proponents of this, and various others. The whole point of or I shouldn't say the whole point, but one of the big themes of the Mothman Prophecies is that the Mothman was some sort of entity warning of an upcoming disaster, and he was perhaps extraterrestrial. And I would describe that book as sort of like a New Age spiritualistic and Fortean style book, which really I think have invaded the topic of Mothman and really kind of tainted the flavor of the creature. And actually, Deborah Dixon, who is the writer of a book called Fortean Geographies, noted that John Keel's book, The Mothman Prophecies, was heavily coded in terms of insider-outsider references to kind of Fortean events. By the way, Fortean is in reference to, was his name John Fort? The writer John?
I think so, yeah.
I think it's John Fort, yeah. But she said his book was heavily coded in terms of insider-outsider references, and it's, quote, "It is unclear how much of the anxiety he expresses stems from his own projection of racial conflict in the U.S. or simply reiterates the concerned views, considering..." End quote. So, considering how these Men in Black and in some cases aliens are described as having this foreign appearance, as we've talked about before, or described in a way that evokes racist stereotypes, a lot of the alien kind of theories to me reek of racial anxiety. I don't know if you've got that feeling.
Yeah, we alluded to that briefly with like the MIBs as well. Also, it was Charles Fort. Just look that one up.
Charles, thank you.
Yeah, Charles. What was his middle name? It was something fun. Hoy. Charles Hoy Fort, which...
That's a good name.
It's fun. You don't hear that one very often. Anyway, but yeah, sorry, please, we can return to the... now that I've commented on this man's name, we can talk again about people being insensitive to other cultures.
I think there definitely is a point that could be made about like the UFO phenomenon from the 50s through the 60s being kind of related to Cold War and like racial anxieties that were going on. I think that's a pretty well accepted view of that. But I noticed something interesting. So I'm going to read you a quote here from a book called John Keel and a New Demonology. Sorry, it's not a book. It's a research paper.
That's such a good title.
Yeah, so it's called... This is the quote that says, quote, "A poll by the Gallup organization in August of 1947 found that the vast majority of Americans who held an opinion on flying saucers believed they were products of the imagination, optical illusions, mirages, etc. John Keel was one of the few Americans who, in 1947, opted for a more esoteric explanation for UFOs. When asked to elaborate on what he initially believed, Keel responded, "I assumed after reading Fort they must be spaceships. Fort didn't really come right out and advocate the ET thesis, but he said that there was something there and that it had been around for a long time because he'd traced reports all the way back." Oh shoot, my thing cuts off. I think it was all the way back to the 1800s. I'll have to check that. The extraterrestrial hypothesis for UFOs would later be embraced, or at least accepted as plausible by millions across the world, including a number of establishment figures. End quote. So that's from A New Demonology, John Keel and the Mothman Prophecies by David Clark from Sheffield Hallam University Research Archive. But anyway, I pulled that quote because I thought it was something interesting, is that the majority of people in 1950s and 60s, probably like the majority of people today, didn't buy flying saucers. You know, it's so easy when we're looking at the past to be like, oh, everybody's but most people think about that stuff and go like, yeah, it's an optical illusion. Most people tend to approach weird things with that sort of cynicism, I think.
Yeah, and I'd like to know, that goes like all the way back to like the Augsburg Book of Miracles, right?
Absolutely.
Like it's very easy for us to look back and go, these foolish, unenlightened people, just assuming it was a demon.
Right.
And I don't know. Sometimes you need to remember that they are still human beings who can think.
Yeah.
Like,
and are smart,
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so like, I think it's just very interesting that most people, from there's a metric on how many people believed in flying saucers, and most people, save for people like John Keel, did not. And so I think that should be something that's noted when we're talking about suddenly this whole community is now a believer in flying saucers. I don't know. And I don't know. So definitely they were seeing some weird stuff. It's just, I don't think they were UFOs, but
one day we'll have to do like a full UFOs
absolutely
episode, because like I am just so suspicious of all of the big figures in those communities. Like, it's just the fact that they are all like ex-military guys or members of pop punk bands is definitely or member of pop punk band.
Speaking of
more
which,
specifically,
Speaking of which, I saw Angels and Airways live in 2019, and he was talking about. He spent a good portion of the time talking about extraterrestrials and the To the Stars Academy, which at the time I remember I was like, that's very strange, and now in this day and age, I'm like, that's very sus.
That's very strange.
Yeah. So, but that's outside of the scope of this episode. But yeah, I mean, I don't have anything else to say on this. Like, I could see why people get the feeling that, like, you're seeing people boarding spacecraft and stuff, or like a flying creature. Like, I could see the alien hypothesis, like that existed before John Keel, obviously. Like that popped into the narrative on this pretty early on, because it makes sense that it would. Considering some of the other things that happened leading up to the Mothman events.
Yeah,
but,
and
go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, of course, worth noting, right, that UFOs really started popping off in like the 50s. Right after the death of a famous Thelemite, of course. But nothing to worry about there.
No, we don't need to think about that.
Yeah, Jack Parsons. I think we should examine the possibility that the Mothman is Lamb. Sorry, not Am.
Lamb, yeah, it could be. No, see, because Lamb looked like a gray.
Lamb looked like so Lamb was boarding the craft, clearing the way for.
It was Iwas that was flying around.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, of course. Wait, if you rearrange the letters in Iwas and flip them over and change them with different letters, it says Mothman.
My favorite bit. I love doing that.
It's a good bit. Okay, that's all I had to say on aliens, unless there's anything else you want to say.
Yeah, really the things that I had to say on aliens we've covered, and then the last thing that I had was like, we really just got to do a full episode on them eventually, but just because I'm so suspicious of them, I'm just putting it off. So sorry, listeners, if you're out there, if the people are crying for an alien episode,
we'll
just let us know.
It's just much like MK Ultra, it's such a big thing to sink your teeth into that we're gonna have to figure out how we're gonna do that one. But another theory put forth, just to keep the ball rolling, is that the Mothman that was seen was actually Green Beret HALO training. So the February 2014 issue of Soldier of Fortune contained an article, UFO Mystery Solved, Mothmen Were Actually Green Berets. Authored Harold Hutchinson writes that Special Operations Forces near Point Pleasant West Virginia were testing high-altitude, low-opening parachuting, HALO, for use in Vietnam. According to Hutchinson, the jumpers used luminous paint to be seen during the tests. Many of the tests of that procedure occurred near the Teton area and Point Pleasant. What the Green Berets making those jumps hadn't figured, this is a quote from Harold Hutchinson, what the Green Berets making those jumps hadn't figured on was the fact that people on the ground could see it as well, in reference to the luminous paint. I don't know. I'm looking at pictures of these guys. It's a dude with a parachute. If they saw Mothman for one brief moment, like disappear behind foliage, I could buy this. But Mothman chasing you through the air and the red eye. It's one of those things where it doesn't quite fit
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah, exactly. It's like all of them. That's what I think what we found, and honestly what John Keel found out, it drove him a little more insane than it did us, I think. But yeah, what you find out the more you look into Mothman is that the reason that so many people believe it's aliens, or that there's a fuzzy cryptid running around in the forest with glowing eyes, is because none of the rational explanations make sense for everything. Because it really doesn't. It doesn't work. Like when you look up the paratrooper, like you look up pictures of them and what they look like, and you think about the functionality of parachutes as they relate to cars traveling 100 miles an hour, and you just go, no, I don't think so.
I don't think so either. And even this article mentioned that this is not like a one-size-fit-all thing. Like it's an interesting idea, but like it doesn't fit all of the sightings.
Yeah, and while we're at it though, I think we should briefly mention Operation Wandering Soul.
Yeah, I think this is a good place for that.
Because so it was exercised in not exactly the same time period, but near enough, right? It was during Vietnam.
Right.
It was a psychological warfare program, and every conspiracy podcast in our oeuvre has talked about Wandering Soul before, so we don't have to spend much time on it. But it's worth noting, right? Like the weird electronic messages, like strange noises, just the general vibe of spooky things happening in the forest as relate to military operations.
Right, because wasn't it? I mean, this was Aquino, right? Michael Aquino.
Yeah,
this was one of his first ones. Yeah,
this is our boy,
returning villain. And like they basically mounted speakers to the bottom of helicopters to try and convince the Viet Cong that it was their dead soldiers telling them to give up their arms or to come out of hiding. Right.
Mm-hmm.
If memory serves, and of course, I believe a lot of the Viet Cong were probably insulted by this because, like most people, they're not stupid, right? Maybe Major General Aquino might have figured in his racist Satanist mind. Sorry, that's editorialization.
And true.
Like, did it work? Was it effective? Like, did people believe it, or is it
kind of like it's the same as I think they've talked about this on Subliminal Jihad too, right? Like the fact that later on the goal changed, because initially it was like, we're going to break the spirit of these people. We'll play on these like backwater farmers and like tell them like, ooh, it's me, your friend. I'm a ghost in hell now. Give up your arms. But later on, the Viet Cong would shoot at the helicopters playing those messages, because of course you would. And so they later on used the helicopters to reveal the position of these soldiers in the forest, and then they would bomb the areas that they were shooting from.
Gotcha.
A strategy which didn't last long, because saying, let's deliberately see if we can get this helicopter shot down so we know where the guys are, didn't go over great with the helicopter pilots for whatever reason.
Yeah, for some reason. Well, and here's the thing is, this does remind me of another CIA tactic which was used in the Philippines. I want to say this was in the 40s or 50s.
Oh, the vampires?
The Aswang, which was led by a guy named Edward Lansdale. And it was like they were capitalizing on this belief in a creature similar to a vampire in Philippines lore, where they would, I guess, just like kill a guy and drain him of his blood and then be like, ooh, the vampires are mad at you, and then like try to use that to their advantage because people were, of course, perturbed.
Yeah, which just first on its face, that is the most demonic thing I have ever heard. Like,
it's horrifying.
Doing that and then saying like, yeah, we're the good guys. After we drained this man's body of blood, we left it where it would be found.
Yeah. Oh, like here's something great. So Lansdale, the guy, I guess the CIA guy who's in charge of that, this is a quote. It says, in his memoir, Lansdale recounted how they would kidnap one hook, I don't know what that is, puncture his neck with 2 holes, hang his body by the heels, drain him of blood, and dump the corpse on a trail that other hooks would pass by. When the hooks discovered their dead comrade, they'd promptly pack up and relocate to a different hill because, of course. Yeah,
that's the strange thing is they're like, we beat them. These irrational fools were afraid that the same thing would happen to them. Like, no. Yeah, dude,
that's completely rational.
Yeah, like if I woke up one day and my friend was sitting on my college campus with his body drained of blood, my first thought wouldn't be, oh, there's a vampire. It would be, someone killed him and drained his body of blood. I don't want to be here anymore.
I should leave. Yeah, no, totally. But I don't know, like these, so Wandering Soul and don't remember the name of the Aswang Op, but you can Google it. Like, these are two examples of like things we know historically that the CIA did overseas. So if you're the type of person to believe that our government, I don't know if I would believe this, but if you're the type of person to believe our government would run ops on its own population,
No.
these, I mean, that does kind of fit what's going on here a little bit.
Mhm.
It fits some of the things. Again, like everything, it fits some of the things. Right.
Yeah, also, I don't think it was the CIA that did Wandering Soul. I think it was some other branch of military intelligence.
Right.
I know
I think that
like
was the
quibbling over nothing, but
sure. No, it was the CIA did the Oswald one, and
Yeah.
then I don't know who did the Wandering Soul.
let's see.
So
Let me
apologies.
just look up. Oh, interesting. It doesn't say it on the Wikipedia either.
Oh wait,
It just says exercised by U.S. forces.
well,
See, whenever I go there expecting to get angry, and I do. I go there looking for actual information, and inevitably it isn't on there.
yeah.
Okay. Anyway,
This is
I don't know
your
why so
version
much
of
this
seeing an
episode is-
owl and it's a moth.
yeah. I don't know why so much of this episode is me getting angry at Wikipedia and the status of its
Yeah.
articles, but oh well.
Okay, so here's another theory that I'm going to float forward, and listeners might be surprised by my stance on this. Angels. Was Mothman an angel?
No,
No.
you're insane.
You're insane. And like, I don't even feel like I have to defend that position.
No,
No, I really don't. But here's some.
but
Just-
we will.
Not even that. I just because I felt bad for not having some deep biblical content for people this episode. Here's a little bone I'm going to throw you. Most biblical angels have the appearance of a normal human, often not described with wings, interestingly enough, but often with wings as well in the Hebrew Bible and on occasion the Christian Bible. We have a meme going around about biblically accurate angels, which are not at all biblically accurate. I don't know if you've seen some of
Or
these.
angels.
Yeah, no, not at all. So the strange looking angels that appear in the Bible, like with 4 faces or 6 wings or whatever, generally appear in visions and prophecies, and the ones that supposedly appear to people appear like men. That being said, like even the strange ones still retain some human characteristics.
Mhm.
So, like wings and on a human, okay, that fits the Mothman, right? If it weren't for the gray skin, glowing red eyes, lack of neck, all that stuff. Also, biblical angels were in the habit of speaking directly to those they were in contact with, identifying themselves, and not in the habit of terrorizing innocent people. So even if you are the type of person to believe in angels, this does not fit with the long-held Hebrew, Christian, and Muslim descriptions of angels.
Yeah,
so there, I got it out of my system.
Yeah, and also, I think it's worth noting a lot of this stuff. Anytime that like something weird happens and people say it's angels, at this point now, I like just think of knowing, and I'm like, oh, I'm just discounting everything you have to say.
Yeah.
But except for the witness, to be clear, because she was just describing like the appearance of it. She wasn't saying this was an angel. She was saying
Exactly.
it's a humanoid figure with wings. Like the only popular conception of a humanoid figure with wings that we have. Like,
Sure. And listen, I'm probably the worst Christian ever, because anytime someone goes, it was angels, I go, shut up, idiot. So I apologize to my other Christian friends out there, but it's one of those things where I'm like, no, it wasn't. Like, I don't feel like we even need to defend that. It would be an angel if it appeared to you and went, hello, I am an angel. Then you could have a leg to stand on. That's my opinion on
yeah, if
angels.
Mothman started it with "Be not afraid of my giant glowing red eyes," then I would go, okay.
Be not afraid of this German shepherd I've killed. Yeah.
I bring a peace offering. Your neighbor's
angels-
dog.
Angels are just like big cats dropping like rats on you.
That is a very funny conception of Mothman. Just Mothman as weird cat that got mutated by the explosives runoff.
Yeah. Let's talk about that as far as, because like that was another thing that like I think one of the documentaries I watched, they're like, oh, the sandhill crane could fit if it had been mutated by the munitions plant and grown twice in size, right? And I'm like, that's another thing where I hear that and I'm like, that sounds just as fantastical as there's a Mothman flying around. Because listen, I'm no biologist, but from my understanding of mutations is they generally cause congenital birth defects and death. They don't make you triple in size usually.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Like we all had that moment of disappointment at like age 6 where you realize oh, chemical waste would not give me superpowers. It would probably give me burns all over my body and then cancer.
Yeah. Spider-Man died of cancer.
Yeah.
Famously.
But yeah, and also I did some digging around. I couldn't find much on the exact nature of the explosive waste in the military base because for whatever reason, people aren't super forthcoming about that. But
no, it wasn't
TNT
and like nitroglycerin. It was munitions. It was all.
Oh yeah, no, I mean like
explosives.
like the runoff and the way that it was like
Oh, I see
affecting the environment around it. Yeah, like they weren't like giving exact locations or anything like that. But yeah, it wasn't causing mutations. It was just poisonous.
Yeah, it was killing fish, and like I think it was like mutating some of the fish that were in the water, but like in the way that they were like they had an extra eye and died young, you know, like
like in the classic like chemical runoff way. Like
exactly.
It wasn't like the fish were extra large and glowed.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's one we can pretty handily just toss in the bin. Here's another one that's fun. I was a big fan of this one. I both love and hate it. So, what's your opinion on the Mothman being a pterosaur?
Anytime people say maybe it was a dinosaur, I know. I want to believe, you know, like the really the X-Files poster. Like that's how I feel about it. I want to think that there's dinosaurs out there, be it in Loch Ness or Point Pleasant, but
be it by Aleister Crowley's old house or the old munitions plant. Listen, here's the thing. Another one of the documentaries I watched was talking about how like, yes, you know, perhaps it could be a pterosaur. You know, the coelacanth, which is a type of sea fish that was thought to be extinct for millions of years. They found it, you know, it completely unchanged by evolution, you know, somewhere in Spain or something. And they're like, well, if the coelacanth could do it, it's like, first off,
if this small fish that lives deep in the ocean can, then the flying lizard could as well.
Exactly.
No, I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, I wish. Listen, I'm with you. I really wanted it to be a pterosaur, but it's just not. So.
Yeah, like the world is big, and honestly, I'm not even on principle opposed to the thought of like a relatively large creature going undiscovered, right? Like,
no, I mean that's like
I'm not a Bigfoot believer, but like the thought that there's like I don't know, like a weird small group of monkeys living out in that part of the America, it's not like on its face something I entirely doubt, even if it's not something I believe. But like,
well, I think science is with you because there's an estimated like 12 million separate species on the planet, and we've like confirmed, documented like only like 1 point something million.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't remember the numbers, but like even science estimates there's a huge amount that we haven't found. So like, I buy that too.
But yeah, but the big point is like, you know, those monkeys notably don't fly around.
Right.
You know, like,
and they don't call you in the middle of the night and go, there will be a collapse on the Silver Point
Bridge.
Exactly. You know.
Yeah, they don't show up they don't appear right before disasters anywhere. If they exist.
Or maybe
they do, and they're just really good at hiding. We don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. Yeah, so I wish it was a pterosaur. We already kind of covered like the prank hoax angles. Like that stuff was definitely happening, but it doesn't fit all of the narrative,
it doesn't.
In my opinion.
It doesn't make sense for the start. Later on, though, like I think my favorite was weren't there people who just like attached 2 red lights to a weather balloon and were like driving around? Those guys rock. I'm sorry.
Those guys pretty sick. Yeah.
It's very funny to like see the entire town being traumatized by this terrifying event and go, you know what would be pretty funny.
Yeah.
But
so okay. Are there any other any other theories you want to cover?
I meant to bring this up when we were wandering soul adjacent. Our souls wandered elsewhere. Sort of the MK Ultra angle of it.
Right.
No, I'm sorry. I don't believe it.
No,
we're both breaking form. You don't think it was an angel. I don't think it was MK Ultra. We're entering a new era of the show.
What's happening?
But yeah, like it really nothing about it is in line with the sort of things that you would see later on in MK Ultra things. Like there's the weird and this one I don't want to get too into this just because SJ covered it very well, but in the Mothman Prophecies they talk about like that weird shed that was set up right next to a school and then like disappeared.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like that's creepy and weird, but I don't think that the people who saw the exact same thing in that car had all been dosed with acid and had experienced no hallucinations before or after that, and then just saw that. Like
and they
it's
all
not in
saw the same
line.
thing. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it doesn't fit. And yeah, that is not to say that this was not some sort of government psyop of
Yeah,
some
exactly.
sort. It's just
Like-
that I don't think we can connect it to a specific one that we know of, if it is that.
Yeah, and like the thing for me personally, that's part of why I'm very suspicious of the MK Ultra crowd who talks about it, because there's not many of them, but there's people out there who are like, yeah, dude, they just like gave all of them LSD, and then these people saw it, and A, it's not really how LSD works,
Nope.
but B, it's much closer to Wandering Soul just in the way it actually happened, and I don't think this was like the same people from Operation Wandering Soul, but if you're going to draw a comparison to a contemporary military psyop,
yes,
it's this one. It's the one where they drove around the forest making spooky noises and trying to scare people.
This is a lot more Aquino than Gottlieb. That's I think what we can say. Yeah, absolutely. And much like with MK Ultra, I think the wrong facets of this get like sensationalized, because like with the MK Ultra, everybody's like, ooh, the government was giving us LSD, and it's like,
yeah, I wish I was around for that, man. Like,
right?
No,
like,
you don't.
That is crazy, but they also don't mention like the extreme abuse that the people who were under that, like, just horrific abuse, often sexual in nature, like the more mundane but still like wildly evil thing and like hard to believe thing that was happening with MK Ultra. And then I think the same thing, a similar thing with Mothman is like, they're like, oh, all these crazy UFOs, people saw all these weird lights and they saw a flying Mothman. It's like, yeah, but like there also is like a weird munitions plant. Like there's definitely like weird people going around asking weird questions. There's weird electronic interference, and then like a horrific tragedy. So it's like, I don't know.
Like I said, it's weird because there are like points in history and places that you'll read about where it's like this, right? Where just like for a few months, everything goes wild and then it just returns to normal, right? Like Point Pleasant now seems to be a pleasant point. There's a Mothman statue that people visit.
I've had several friends who live near there and who have gone there. Seems like
one of my
place.
siblings is trying to talk me into driving up there over the break.
Dude,
so I might take a picture at the Mothman statue. We'll see.
I should fly out just to meet you at the Moth. We should do a pilgrimage to the Mothman.
And then go home. Yeah. We won't record.
We won't go to the abandoned igloos to record an episode.
No. Yeah, we'll take a picture, which we won't post, so we can keep our faces off the internet, and then we'll just...
We'll take a picture, and then I'll Photoshop both of us out of it. So it'll just be a picture. Anyway, so... Yeah, I think that about covers every theory that I had. Did that cover all the ones that you had?
Yeah, it pretty much covers them all. And I think just my final thought on it, I'll let you have the last word, of course, because you did a little more work for this one than I did.
No.
But I guess it will have been posted already. But check out my solo episode, everybody. Tell me what you thought of it. I'm sure it went well when I record it tomorrow. So we'll.
I bet it will be good. Yeah, I'm excited to listen to it.
But anyway, my final thought on this though is just. Funnily enough, the people who are trying to debunk all the theories are right in a way that they don't understand, which is to say that none of these theories, rational or otherwise, really make much sense. And I think trying to pin it all on one thing, as opposed to just acknowledging that sometimes the world just goes crazy in specific places for no real reason, or for a very real reason, such as, say, all of the military bases around. But, on a... cosmic sense, right? I don't know. It's not always the gray, hairy, red-eyed monster, but it's also usually not an owl.
Yes, exactly. There is another explanation to be found, and maybe they don't want it to be found. So yeah, my conclusion is a lot similar to yours. Specifically, there does seem to be a lot of disinformation around this case, mainly from John Keel, the guy who popularized it in 1975 after it had kind of died down. Several experiences in his book, Mothman Prophecies, were debunked, should be noted. Most of them. Some even being pranks by his friend and ufologist Gary Barker. Critics have said that his books were, quote, littered with factual errors and other evidence of sloppy reporting, and claimed he was unable to distinguish the most blatantly apparent hoaxes from more credible cases, end quote. And furthermore, like as apparent by the quote that I spoke at the beginning, Keel would later kind of state his portrayal of extraterrestrials as purely a literary device and kind of like backtrack on that. And I don't want to necessarily say that Keel was part of some sort of cover-up, but he was definitely compliant in contributing to a bunch of noise, which muddied the facts of the case to the public eye. Whether that was on purpose or not, I
much
sort of
like
leave that up to discretion.
much like many of the biggest UFO figures, right? Like, it's very similar. Like, it's a similar vibe, right? The government's hiding from you, and then the moment the Pentagon releases like a grainy 4-second video clip, they're like, "This is proof that everything I have ever said was right. Why would they lie to us?"
I can't think of a single reason.
Yeah, me neither. Yeah, it's just it's just adding more noise to it, I think, is ultimately what he did. And I hope that our noise went in a productive direction.
I think it did, because I think we were able to kind of cut out a lot of the fat and sort of debunk the debunks in terms of like, just bringing a little bit of, I think, rational thought to every angle of it. And so unfortunately, I think the most measured take is that something strange definitely happened in Point Pleasant in 1966 and 1967. I'm sure there is a rational materialist answer for what the people there experienced, and I'm sure personally that it was sinister and deliberate in nature. I don't think we have the facts to explain what it is now, and I don't think that we ever will. And like I said, I feel like the collapse of the bridge was unrelated to the phenomena leading up to it, though it was strangely timed and definitely did, and the weird vibe that happened in Point Pleasant. So that being said, I don't think there is a Mothman per se, but there was something lurking in Point Pleasant, and where it is now, who's to say? So, yeah. I hope everyone enjoyed this episode. I had a lot of fun with it. If you could please rate us on iTunes and Spotify, we'd love that. It would be nice of you. You can also follow us on Instagram, Historca Esoterica. See the cool art we post there, fun memes Matt does, cool stories with music that Matt posts, perhaps some reels in the future. We're also on TikTok.
If you know anything about Instagram and TikTok, please tell us, because I made a TikTok on a whim and I have no idea how to navigate this insane app. So please,
Matt
share
has
your
one
thoughts.
job on this podcast, which is to be our social media manager, and he doesn't understand any of it. So
He's
please
so
write
bad.
in.
I'm so bad at being the social media manager. Please, I'm going to get fired and replaced. So
No. But yeah, and then also twitter.com at Histesoterica.
yes.
And should I mention the t-shirts? Is this a good place?
Sure. Yeah. Forthcoming. Yeah. We'll give him a little teaser.
We may or may not have at this point, them up. Either way, they will be coming at some point. If you go to historicaesoterica.threadless.com, you'll see that we have a t-shirt design. If you're interested in contributing to the show, this is completely voluntary. We both take time out of our schedules to do this for fun. And one of us has certainly paid some money for this, which is fine. But if you'd like to contribute financially, you can buy a cool t-shirt with some fun designs. I think the only one we'll have up at the moment right now will be our anti-psyop unit shirt, which
I quite like.
Yeah, and I hope I should probably order one for each of us so we can wrap it.
Ooh, good idea.
So maybe we'll post some pictures to the Instagram and we'll post the link as well. So if you're interested in just helping us out, or you want some cool t-shirt, that's something you can do. And we have more ideas for designs that will be published later on. So if you don't like that one, there might be coming. So check that out. And I am catching up with the YouTube uploads. Slowly but surely, we're almost there. So
yeah, if you're hearing this on YouTube, we've caught up.
Yeah,
it's good to see you.
It is the year 2047. Civilization has collapsed. But you're listening to a wonderful podcast. So yeah, that's about all I had to say. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. So stay safe. If you see an owl out there, that's all it is. It's just an owl. Ignore its glowing red eyes and remember, it's all connected.
Past few months, people have been coming up to me and reporting strange things.
Weird lights, strange phone calls.
Hello, John Keel.
Who is this? A large, red-eyed, human-sized creature that flies? But if such a creature exists, where could it have come from?
One day I started hearing voices. The voices became messages.
And he appeared to be a large flying man with wings. It was the creature that I perceived to be Mothman.
He was right here. All I could see were these two red eyes.